This is another product innovation show, and I'm here with Vishal Kapoor, who is the Director of Product Management at Shipt, American delivery service owned by Target Corporation. He's also a featured speaker at Product School, where he shared his experience and industry expertise building marketplaces and pricing systems. Vishal, such a pleasure having you on the show. Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here. Looking forward to it.
I want to start with the biases in product management. From your experience, what are some of the ones that come to mind? You're making decision on product. Maybe you're working with the team. What are some of the things that catch people out in deciding which direction to go?
So this is a very interesting question. Let me make sure that I understand you correctly before I form an answer. So biases in product management as related to decision making.
Yes.
Right? For the team, for the company, for the larger strategy.
Yes, it could be smaller tactical, or it could be as large as the company wide, related to product.
Got it. It's a very interesting question, and I think it is subjective to the context of where you are, where the company is, what kind of a company it is. The way decisions are made at a media house like New York Times, which has a technology arm, is probably different from the way decisions are made within the search team at Google. Just to set context, right? Like it's on the spectrum of technology, where does the company index itself? Has a lot to do with whether the decisions are made subjectively, or how much of subjectivity is part of the decision making versus objectivity, right? It's impossible to put it in a simple way, to make subjective decisions in Google search because of the scale and everything, right? But there is a big editorial team that may decide how a New York Times website looks like, what content goes up, how it's presented, etc. So first of all, context is important. That said, in companies that I have worked for, I have worked at and built product at, companies like marketplaces, I would say that usually it is a combination of the two. There is usually a large operations team that is trying to run the marketplaces. The way I like to joke about it is, it's artificial human intelligence, right? Which is, there's a lot of humans in the loop, which are actually trying to do the right thing. But a lot of decision making tactically comes from how humans think, how humans act, etc. So in marketplaces, for example, at a company like Shipt, of course we make decisions based on data, right? Depending on the other question is depending on the life cycle of the company. Some companies are 0 to 1, and some companies are trying to go from 1 to n. So they are a 0 to 1, they're trying to go from 1 to n. And some companies are at n. Google search is at n, right? 0 to 1, maybe this is another way of answering. Not just a company, but even a product. When you don't have any data, when you're starting a 0 to 1, you just don't have data. So you are going to make decisions which are basically subjective. As you start scaling, becoming bigger and bigger and bigger as a product, as a company, you get more data. And naturally, the discipline of being more data driven actually just automatically kicks into the company. So I think it is organic. Big technology companies will do it. It will be very, very data and experimentation driven. Small companies startups who are really trying to find their feet are very subjective. It's very founder and opinions driven, because they have educated but strong opinions. So really, it kind of depends on where the company is, and I think where on the technology spectrum. Are you like a media company or like a tech company, as of your core values? So I think those are the two factors that go into decision making.
Right. Where do you feel like, if we look at marketplaces in particular, because this is one of the big areas of in your career, if we look at marketplaces, where do you feel like teams could get caught up in when they make the decision in which direction to go with a product?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. And I think I will start by saying that is the beauty and the challenge of working for a marketplace. Okay, so just take Shipt as an example, right? Three-sided marketplace. There is a customer that is placing the order, the demand side. there is a shopper, which is actually fulfilling the order. So let's call them supply side. We call them supply. And then there is the retailer, which is the inventory or the catalog where the order is actually being fulfilled from. Now here's just let's leave the retailer out of the example for a second. Between the customers and the shoppers, the goals of these two actors are exactly polar opposite. So what do I mean by that? Customers want to pay bottom dollar, and shoppers want to make top dollar,
Yes.
right? Right? Because it's fair because it is their it is they are coming to a company like Shipt or maybe an Instacart or a DoorDash or an Uber Eats, all of the competitors, basically for earning a part of their livelihood. So it's fair that they are trying to earn a reasonable livelihood from all of these companies. But that's where a marketplace actually comes in, and it is a game of balance, right? How do we make sure that we don't build product or skew product to one side to appease one side? I mean, again, appease is probably a strong word, but how do we not skew product to overfit the product to one side so that the other side suffers? Because if any of these sides suffer, the marketplace is not going to sustain itself. It needs to sustain. So that delicate balance that we walk is actually kind of important. So that's the context. I'll give you a simple example. Rating systems, right? A lot of companies have rating systems. Now let's take let's say that. So what happens with the rating system? Uber has ratings. Lyft has ratings. There is a reason why people collect ratings or companies collect ratings is it's an indicator of the quality of service provided by in this case, the supplier. Let's say the supply side, so the driver. Usually the ratings are that somebody's rating the driver, like somebody's rating supply, not the other way around. Usually speaking, that's how you start. So now in this case, assume there is a rating system and there are ratings, and now you are using the rating system you are going to use those ratings for something internally, right? So you are going to use them, for example, for work allocation, right? People who get rated better are probably better people, and they probably need to get a better share of the work because they provide good service over and over again. But here's the problem. What about like there are natural human biases that actually come into it? What if people who are minorities actually get rated lower, not because of their quality of service, but because the fact that they are not a part of the majority group? And how does product actually decide that we don't build things how do we design the product so that it propagates, it fosters equity across the board? So that is what is the beauty of working for a marketplace, so that we can actually kind of every feature that we launch, right? We are very thoughtful about an overall impact across the board. Not just if we launch this feature, besides the fact that it takes time and effort to launch something, how do we make sure that it is actually equitable across the board? So I think that is a big factor that we keep in mind as we build features in our marketplace.
And I don't remember if you told me that or it was somebody else, but it was about that people who built the system, who design the criteria, are biased too. So like there is exactly a bias that exists in all of us. So so you're teaching the AI. I think it was an AI discussion. If you have an AI, well, AI has been taught by people who already have a certain bias. So by definition, it can't be objective.
That's right. I will give you a very simple example. Also, that without going too much into detail as to what we are doing, I'll just say something that exists across the company. Something like a implicit versus an explicit preference, right? Do you want to build what somebody on let's say on the supply side or the demand side, what they want? Do you want to give them, do you want to give them explicit preferences in the product to set what they want, or do you want to infer that based on their behavior, right? So ratings is kind of in that area. Especially surveys and feedback is in that area. So coming to a very simple example, how do you design surveys, right? The person who's designing the surveys has their own biases. And I learned this, for example, early on when I used to design surveys as a PM, is that a lot of times I used to ask leading questions. So think of yourself as an entrepreneur who just started, came up with an idea, and you're doing market research, and you go and you ask your customers, would you like this? And 90% of the time, the answer is going to be yes. And if you ask another leading question, would you use this? The answer would be yes. But I think what happens is where the rubber meets the road, you actually see that 90% people said they would like it and they would use it, but only 10% people are actually using it. So my point is that you are exactly right. This is a very simple example. where these type
Yes.
of biases actually, how do you design a survey? It's even a simple thing like a survey, is that also takes some level of skill to design a good survey and get good data points out of your customer, out of your audience. So yeah.
But I think I don't remember who said it, but it was definitely not in product management. But you could make, I think it was about interpreting the data and building the report. You could basically provide proof of pretty much anything. You could twist at the story and say it in whatever way you almost want. If you really want it, you could probably dig it up. So it is. It was. I think it was about how inherently employees in the company optimize for their metric. And the way they optimize for their metric is not necessarily the best for the company. It is they just extract the max amount on what they're being measured on, but not necessarily what is good for the product or the company. But it's a slightly different direction.
Yeah, it's such an excellent insight. It's such an excellent, taking the thought there. So I'll give you 2 data points there. Number 1 is confirmation bias is real. Right?
Yes,
you are going
absolutely.
to look at, if you're looking for something, if you look at it long enough, you will find that there is something there, right? So it's just how humans operate. Confirmation bias is real. And the second point is that part of it is also the way these evaluation systems and these measurement systems are designed. There is a design system called OKR. There is a great book by an industry legend called John Doerr, which says "Measure What Matters." That's the title of the book, and it's about OKRs and how you set OKRs in your company, etc. But coming to your point, one of the things that I try very hard in my groups wherever I am is I take the wisdom of our leaders at the company. I take that as a sort of a source of truth, right? Like if there are company level OKRs that we want to improve, whatever, unit economics by $1 or whatever, that is done with a lot of input from a lot of committed, intelligent, smart, and thoughtful people. And what I try to do is, okay, I am working where the rubber meets the road. How can I make a line from this all the way up to what the company is trying to do? Out of that $1, can I actually contribute to 5 cents? Can I contribute to 2 cents? Can I contribute to 20 cents? What can I do so that I can actually draw a straight line? I try really hard. It's not always possible, especially when you have platform teams which are building machine learning systems and so on. It's not always easy to say every quarter over quarter that your OKRs are completely connected with the business. It's not always easy. I'll acknowledge that. But I try that. A problem of the OKR system is exactly the other point I mentioned, is that sometimes people who either have not been through that system for a long time, or happen to be in situations or happen to own products where the outcome is not obvious. If you own, for example, I'm going to make this up, a search indexing system, right? Your OKR is, I want to improve the latency of the indexing system from 50 milliseconds to 10 milliseconds. It's a technical product. It's something that runs your entire search infrastructure and all of that. Let's just say that, right?
Sure.
But how do you actually say that actually saves me 20 cents? It's a very, very different, it's very hard for PMs, especially technical PMs, TPMs, to actually draw that line. So you are right. Number 1, confirmation bias is real. And number 2, sometimes because of the measurement systems, because the way people are evaluated against goals, the goals are sometimes set that it makes them feel like they can achieve the goals. Because if you can't achieve the goals, then the system actually says that you have probably not achieved much. If you don't quantify and set a goal, whatever, regardless of whether the goal is has good quality, is a good quality goal or a bad quality goal, or a perfect or an imperfect goal, you need a goal, because that's just how the system works. So there are these things which actually come into picture, when you work in the real world. So yeah, that happens.
And you said that managing people is a lot harder than managing products. That's how we started the conversation. Is there a certain magic? Is there a certain secret about it that is a North Star that you need to aim for when we talk about managing? And let's look at it as product people.
Yeah. Boy, that is a pretty that's a pretty complex question. Is there one North Star when it comes to managing people? I will answer that in a slightly bottom-up way. What am I looking for, or how do I evaluate not just others, but how do I evaluate my own contribution or success as a technology professional, right? Let's start there. So I am looking for basically two types of skills, right? One is I'm looking for somebody who is creative, and creativity basically comes from being data driven. So you are able to look at data, you are aware of your confirmation biases, you can look past your confirmation biases, you are objectively, intellectually intelligent, and you have that experience behind you, or the intelligence behind you to actually look at it from a neutral observer point of view. I will fall prey to this sometimes myself, because sometimes when you get too close to the problems, you don't have an objective point of view. That happens to me, and my boss will keep me in check, and that may happen to her, and then her boss will keep me in check, and so on and so forth. But the one part is to find out the right problems to go after. I love to say this to my PMs, or generally people, is that, especially product people, is that don't spend a lot of time in doing project management. Spend a lot of time in finding ideas. So I don't want you to be farmers. I want you to be hunters, right? So PMs are hunters and not farmers. It may give you a lot of gratification to do a lot of bookkeeping and all of that, but that is not what your intelligence and your goals and everything is, to actually go and hunt, right? So that is number one. Is I like hunters, and I like data-driven hunters, and I like people who are extremely outcome-oriented, not output-oriented. So that is one, right? And the second part is, so first part is choosing the right problems, having the right outcomes, having that, the front part. The second part then is communicating, actually getting it done, and convincing everybody that this was a great problem to solve. So another thing that I like to say about PMs is that, or generally anybody, I like to say is that anybody can be a starter, but it takes a special skill to be a very good finisher, right? So true. I like people to be finishers. Anybody can come up with an idea, but it takes somebody like Mark Zuckerberg to make Facebook, right? Yeah. And make Facebook what it is, right? So there is that special skill there. So those are the two things I'm looking for. I think both are important. And the second part is, you may have to navigate people. Coming back to what you were originally saying, you may have to navigate other people, convince them, negotiate with them, on both sides actually, that this is the right idea, this is why. So you have to convince them at the start. And when you finish, you have to actually, you have to bring them along the way. But when you finish, you have to not only uplift yourself, but uplift everybody who has worked hard, with you, the entire team that has worked hard with you, and uplift them and make a bang and say that this is why this was important, this was a good idea, and everybody worked, for 6 months on this idea, and here are the results to prove that it was a great idea. So I think those are the two things that I'm usually looking for. People who execute with a sense of ownership, take that sense of ownership. I'll say this last thing, and we can move on. One of the things that I like to also tell my PMs is, imagine yourself as somebody who's running a mom and pop store, right? So we like to say, that the PM is the CEO of the product. I think when you say that, I personally think there is a certain undercurrent of entitlement when you say you're the CEO of something. So I don't want to do that. But what I want to do is, I want to say that, assume that, that you were the owner of a mom and pop store, a small business, right? It was a small retail store. It was a small business that you were running as a mom and pop store. What level of autonomy would you execute? What level of ownership would you execute, or agency would you execute to actually make this business successful? That is who you are, right? Mm-hmm. It is not very different from doing that. You will need to go to investors and convince that they need to invest in your idea. And it's the same here. When you build a roadmap, you need to get buy-in from, all of the leadership around you. You will need to finish well. You need to, build on top of your successes and keep going forward. So operate with the level of ownership that when you make decisions at the lower level, what kind of decisions are you making? Operate with that level of ownership of whether this is even a good decision to make right now or not. So be very strategic even when you're being tactical. So that's usually how I evaluate, there are people biases, but that's usually how I evaluate are people who are, sort of are able to look past the biases and basically, take the company, take the team, and even themselves, right? Take it to the next level versus people who are probably, not in the arena, not actually playing the game, but they are actually on the stands, a little bit passive, but they are not actually in the field and actually playing the game with other people. Yeah.
Tim Ferriss talks a lot about that, and I will bring it back to your first point. He talks a lot about that it's infinitely more important to work on what you're working on versus how you're working on it.
Right.
Basically goes back to your first point.
Yes, basically goes back to my point. It goes back to the first, how we started the conversation, was that a part of it is not just what you are working on. A part of it is there are biases and they are real, and looking past your own biases, picking the right problem, but then actually going and convincing everybody that this is the right problem to look at. I think it's kind of a, and then bringing not just yourself, but bringing the entire organization along with you. This is the right way to think about the problem. If we are not thinking like this, then we are probably a little bit narrower than what we need to be. So, those things are what I think working with people, like you said, right? People, because of all these complex decisions that somebody has to make every single time. That's why people are harder than products. Products are, I think, an outcome of good people and a good process. If you have a good team and the team has discipline, I think the building great things, as the world is gray, right? The world changes every day. Building great things as the world changes and doing it fast is just a natural outcome, as long as you have discipline and people who are committed to doing it.
Right. We speak to quite a lot of PMs, and I've heard personally from a lot of them is that struggle of being a hunter versus a farmer. They say, sometimes I feel I'm an email router. Sometimes I feel I spend so much time on Slack. I have to talk to my team all the time. How do I do this? What's the right way for me to actually work on something that looks forward versus just being always reacting in a nanosecond? What do you tell your PMs? What's the philosophy you try to tell them around that?
So I think one of the things that I try not to do, you're asking another important question and another important point of how do I coach my PMs? Let's reframe the question in a slightly different way. One of the things that I think any reasonable leader will try not to do is try not to micromanage, right? I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster. So you don't want to, if I am not as close to the problems as my product managers are, and I don't want to thrust my opinions on my PMs for them to do something. What I will do, you are asking a process question. So what I do is, I saw a very interesting rubric on Twitter the other day, and it basically said that 25% of the time, a leader is setting goals for their team, for their reports. That 25% of the time, these are your goals, reinforcing the goals. 50% of the time, they are actually working with them together. So it's a player coach. And then the rest of the 25% of the time, actually, it's more like feedback, which is like, can you guys keep me in check, right? That's sort of like the level of respect and humility and the empowerment that you can actually really truly do. I think one of the things is, if you try to micromanage, what happens is that it takes away the sense of empowerment and trust away from the people that you're doing that to, right? So it feels like, I don't trust you, I don't think you're doing a good job, therefore I have to intervene and I have to bring some adult supervision, which is not, just on principle, I don't think that's a good idea. If that happens to me, then I feel that way, and if I pay that forward, then I'm sure that other people feel that way as well. So I try not to pay that forward. But that said, how do I make sure that for PMs, especially PMs who are running the teams individually, how do I make sure that they feel empowered and not sort of stuck with this sort of a problem or sort of cornered, that they are an email router, or they are just going and maintaining your sprints Slack. And your Excel spreadsheets or Slacks or whatever, right? Exactly. So the way I would do it is, first I would try to coach them outside. I would, in our one-on-ones, I would say, okay, you tell me. And the other thing is also, again, situations are different. So what I would do is, I really, really encourage people to talk to each other. I think that's where it starts. First go, criticize, praise publicly, but criticize privately. So if you do have If you feel that things could be better and they are not optimum for you as a product manager, go and talk to the person and see if you can actually work it out between yourselves. It is important for you for the PM who is in that situation, first of all, to grow and learn how to actually handle themselves. And basically that fosters autonomy. So I will coach them, I will give them some tips. We will have a very candid conversation in the one-on-one, and and I will say, okay, can you try this? Can you try that? Why don't you go and try? That's number one. If that's not landing, I understand, a lot of times that may or may not land. At that point, then I will probably have a conversation at my level, right? And then I'll be like, I have told my PMs, this actually happened at Shipt. Right. And I will go and tell those leaders, my corresponding leaders, I have told my PMs not to farm, and I've told them to hunt. Now we need to negotiate here. It's not that they are not farming because they are lazy or they are not disciplined or whatever. That's not the case. I am taking ownership and I'm taking responsibility that I have actually told them not to farm, right? So that they have time to hunt. So I will have that conversation, right? It's not like I really don't believe in, make a good, cast people in the right roles, right? Like cast them and then get out of their way. That's just like, another way in my mind, that is another way of saying, I'm going to throw you in the deep end and then you sink or swim. It's up to you. That's just not right. Ultimately, what am I trying to do, right? I'm trying to I am trying to basically achieve outcomes through people, which is the point that you were making before. Managing people is very hard.
Yeah.
And it takes time for people to grow and develop the autonomy and feel that they are trusted and, developing that level of trust, etc. It's a hard thing to build a very good team. So where I will go in this case is I will go at my level and I will make it clear that I am the one who said who told them not to farm. I am the one who said you will not route emails. I am the one who said that you will not do Slack. Either we hire somebody at that level to do that, to route the emails, and they can do it across teams without, a PM is not a catch-all. They are not going to do everything that, let's draw lines. It's good to draw lines because then you know what you're accountable for versus, and this has happened to me multiple times in my career when there is nobody to point a finger at. It's like, oh, go and talk to the PM, right? But that's just not fair at the end of the day. So that's what I'm saying. I've lived in those shoes. I will step in. I will say that this is something I want. How do we make it happen? And that's a different conversation. So that I will basically make sure that my PMs, especially the people, and I take personal care. I'm personally invested in them as people, not just reports. I don't care about rank. I feel like I'm responsible not only for the company and the outcomes, but I'm responsible for people who report to me. Especially, I'm responsible for their lives and their well-being and having a good quality of life and all of that, right? So I will intervene if an intervention is required. I'll make sure that they are in the loop. First, I will try for them to actually sort it out themselves because that's really the right way of growing as a person. But if that doesn't land, then I will actually, at my level, go and try to see what we can do to work around it. Yeah.
Right, as much autonomy as possible, of course.
Exactly. Right.
Vishal, we're going to do this 4 quick fireside chat questions. Short answer, just see what you think. And we've been piloting that a few times, but I'm curious what first thing that comes to mind. A lot of companies don't have transparent product processes. Why does it happen? Who needs to fix it and how?
Can you repeat that? I lost you for 1 second. Can you repeat
Yes. A lot of companies don't have transparent product processes. Why does that happen? Who needs to fix it and how should they do it?
Yeah. I think the one word answer that you're looking for, because it's a quick rapid fire round, I would say shared ownership. Shared ownership. And right. I would say not just shared ownership, I would say shared leadership.
Right.
That's my answer.
There's a lot of pressure to do what a big customer wants you to do, especially if you're in a B2B company. How do you dig yourself out of this situation as a product leader?
There's a lot of pressure to do something for a B2B company for what the customer wants.
For one large client.
Yeah. I would say talk to your salespeople. Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm not joking. Talk to your salespeople and tell them that this is not going to scale. there is a risk if that client terminates the contract with us. What happens to everybody else?
Mhm. A lot of folks copy the features from their competitors. Why do they do that and not focus just on the customers? What should they do instead?
So, great question. I'll use a line from DoorDash: customer obsessed, not competitor focused. But I will clarify that statement by saying, ultimately, if you think of it as a marketplace, because I'm a marketplace guy, the demand pool or the people who are doing something, let's say, social network or whatever that is, the demand pool is the same. One company pushing the innovation to do something, let's say, stickers, making up, a few years ago, somebody did stickers. The demand is now used to having stickers. It's not a exceptional request for them. It's just expected. So everybody else has to call it copy or call it normalizing that feature across the industry. You can call it copy, but really it is normalizing because everybody just wants it. And then from on top of that, then you figure out what is the next thing to build. I don't really call it copying. It is normalizing because the demand pool is the same and they expect it now. Yeah.
The way that Steve Jobs would put it, we don't copy, we steal.
I mean, there's different ways. I don't want to. I genuinely say that's a funny one. I genuinely think that it is normalizing because, if Amazon is taking again a page from fulfillment, where the space that I work into, if Amazon is going to say that we are going to give you 2-hour deliveries, going forward, yeah, everybody else has to do it because the customers expect it. Call it copying or call it whatever you want, but customers expect it. It's the same demand pool, and their habits have changed because of one big player who has innovated in that space. Everybody else has to kind of catch up to it, if you think about it like that. Yeah.
Right. Last question. Asking users what to build. How bad of an idea that is?
Now I will quote Steve Jobs, who basically said, people don't know what they want. And I will also quote I think he misquoted Henry Ford, but he basically said, if you asked Henry Ford, or if Henry Ford went and asked customers, what would you like? They would say, I want a faster horse, right? Versus a car, right? So I don't think that is a Henry Ford quote, but Steve Jobs said that. I think Steve Jobs can say that. because
Yeah.
there was one Steve Jobs, right? So he can say that. I think there are clear visionaries who can anticipate where the world is going. Not only that, but they have the conviction and the belief. Like take Mark Zuckerberg, right? He's trying to take the world and his $1 trillion company into virtual reality at this point. That takes a level of conviction and a level of commitment, like a level of vision like no other. He's really trying to take everybody into into virtual. They changed the name of the company. That's just, nobody would have thought that. I wouldn't have, right? So
Yeah.
one part is that there are the Jobs and the Zuckerbergs and, the Larry Pages and, all of these, those and the Travis Kalanick's of the world who are trying to do, these things. But that said, it's not that you can completely ignore what the customer wants, right? It is always good to take a lot of different opinions and then make your own decision. So yes, it's not that Apple does not do feedback. It's not that they don't do focus groups. They do it. But then they make their own decision because they know where they're trying to push the boundary. And then they make their own decision in deciding what they actually want to do. So yeah.
They just do it better.
It's a collective intelligence. Exactly right. Exactly.
Right. Vishal, any parting thoughts you want to leave the audience with? Any final messages? Anything I haven't asked you, but you wish I did?
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the chance and the opportunity. This has been fantastic. I think I will leave the audience with one thing that is top of mind for me is, I kind of touched upon that before, was the two aspects that people should really focus on, or leaders should really focus on when you're trying to achieve outcomes or good goals. The two aspects are people as well as processes. Right? If you have a bunch of really smart people, but they are not disciplined, or there is no system for them to, operate, it kind of becomes a lot of the flies, unfortunately. So you don't want that. If there are just processes for the sake of, you going and punching your time card, then that's not productive either because there is no intellectual work happening. So I think leaders need to focus on both of those, and that's how you should grow your company, grow your teams. otherwise, this was a fantastic conversation. I, think, we covered pretty much most of it. One last parting thought that I would leave the people with is that there is a fantastic book called The Score Takes Care of Itself. And this is a book by a coach called Bill Walsh. And I live in San Francisco, so this sort of hits home for me. This is about the coach so 49ers, San Francisco 49ers, the NFL team, they were not really doing really well. They were doing very badly. This was, I think, in the 70s and the 80s, back when. They were not doing well at all. And how Bill Walsh comes and he basically does, these, so Amazon has 14 leadership principles, but Bill Walsh's principles, I think there are 39. And they are very tactical. Respect each other, right? Don't think of the other person as cynical, or don't come from a point of view that you are, that they know, that you know better than them, right? For example. So things like that, I request everybody on this audience to take, to at least read a summary of that book, if not the entire book. It is a blueprint for how leadership should operate, how good leaders should behave. And I think the title says it all. The score takes care of itself. So focus on the people, focus on the processes, and then ultimately good outcomes are just an outcome of that.
And we will link it in the show notes, guys, because I think this is the book you absolutely want to read if you want to get to that ultimate level of performance and career success. Vishal, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to any other follow-up questions if the audience has that. I'm happy to answer those questions as well.